This is super unsettling because I haven't been using protection with him. And I don't want to start a family with a liar.
Aviva never expected her first night with Stig to hit her with this kind of shock. The room felt warm, the city lights outside glowing, and yet she couldn't shake the sudden panic tightening her chest. They had been reckless, throwing caution to the wind, and for the first time she realized just how high the stakes were. Unprotected intimacy isn't something you just shrug off, especially when you've barely known someone for a few hours. The thought of a potential pregnancy flickered in her mind, sharp and unignorable, and it made her stomach twist. She trusted him, perhaps more than she should have, and yet the moment the consequences of that night hit her, doubt crept in. Stig had a charm that was magnetic, almost disarming, but she couldn't ignore what she had heard about him before stepping into this whirlwind of attraction. The whispers about him being a player, someone with a trail of complicated past relationships, suddenly felt louder in her ears. His confidence, the way he carried himself like he had no past baggage, started to feel like a mask hiding more than just charm. Even in the heat of the moment, Aviva had felt a connection. He was attentive, playful, and undeniably charismatic, and yet beneath that chemistry lurked these uneasy questions. How long had it been since he was serious about someone? Was this attraction fleeting, just a thrill for him, or did it mean something real? She had come across stories, anecdotes from people who had seen Stig in previous relationships, and the red flags they described now felt uncomfortably close. And there was more she hadn't yet considered. His past in Texas, a serious ex who he claimed had left a mark on him, someone whose shadow seemed to follow him still. Was he really over her? Did he carry that chapter of his life in ways that could affect what was unfolding right now? The possibility gnawed at her. At the same time, Aviva's emotions were contradictory. She wanted to believe in the instant connection, the excitement of finally meeting someone she had been curious about, someone whose life and career seemed intriguing and full of possibility. But excitement doesn't erase instinct. It doesn't mute the internal alarm bells that start ringing when small inconsistencies, little evasions, or unexplained silences begin to add up. She remembered the way he avoided certain topics casually, the fleeting tension when someone mentioned his past, and the slight hesitation that followed a simple question about Texas. That pause, brief as it was, now seemed enormous. It felt like a crack in the foundation, a tiny sign that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't seen the full picture yet. The contrast between her trust and the looming red flags created a tension she couldn't ignore. She had allowed herself to feel safe, to feel drawn to him, to allow intimacy so early, and now every instinct screamed that she might have rushed into something bigger than she could handle. And that fear wasn't just about regret, it was about the very real, very immediate consequences of their decisions. She wasn't just questioning him, she was questioning herself. How had she allowed herself to feel this close to someone she barely knew? And more pressing than her own doubts was the uncertainty of his past. Could he still be entangled in unresolved feelings from Texas? Was this connection genuine? Or was she part of a pattern, someone swept up in the thrill before reality hit? The tension was thick, but so was curiosity. What would happen next? Could trust be rebuilt before things got out of hand? And could the choices they had made so impulsively in the heat of the night lead to a deeper heartbreak she wasn't prepared for? These questions were urgent, unrelenting, and impossible to push aside. I'm Sabrina. Welcome to TLC Drama Live. Hit subscribe and tell me what you would do if you were in Aviva's shoes. Because from the moment she stepped into that room, nothing was simple, nothing was certain, and the layers of betrayal and potential regret were only just beginning to unfold. Aviva opened her eyes to sunlight, streaming through the window, the quiet hum of the city outside barely registering as her mind raced. The night had been intense, electric, almost intoxicating, and now the first light of morning brought with it a strange mix of exhilaration and unease. Her body remembered the connection, the chemistry that had felt so effortless, yet her mind started to replay every impulsive choice she had made. She couldn't stop thinking about the unprotected night, the reckless abandon, and the very real possibility that she had overstepped boundaries that were far too soon. She sat up, running her hands through her hair, a wave of regret washing over her even as she tried to cling to the thrill of what had just happened. How had she let herself get so close, so fast? She knew she was drawn to him. no denying that, but the questions kept piling up, echoing louder than the lingering desire. Stig, on the other hand, seemed almost oblivious to the swirl of anxiety brewing in her chest. He was already up, checking his phone, sending messages, making calls, his mind seemingly occupied with something that wasn't her. Aviva watched him, her curiosity piqued, wondering if this was just the way he operated, or if she was noticing cracks she couldn't ignore. He was a musician, a performer, someone whose life demanded focus on gigs, studios, and collaborations. The glimpse she was catching now of his career side, the distracted texts, the half-finished melodies hummed under his breath, made her feel like she was trying to connect with someone who existed in two different worlds, one thrilling and magnetic, and the other distant and preoccupied. The split focus was subtle, almost invisible, yet in the back of her mind, it raised flags she couldn't shake. Her thoughts drifted involuntarily toward his past, the way he carried himself, so confident, so certain, hinted at stories he wasn't telling. She remembered the glimpses she had gotten about Texas, the ex he had left behind, and the shadow that lingered there, unspoken but heavy. Was he really over her? Could someone so charming and magnetic still carry pieces of another relationship in ways that would affect what they had just started? Aviva had trusted the moment, trusted him, trusted her own instincts, yet the more she replayed those first hours, the more uneasy she felt. There was something about the way he moved, the way he spoke about work, about his life outside their bubble, that suggested the full picture wasn't quite revealed yet. She couldn't deny the chemistry. They had undeniable sparks, but in that morning light, everything felt complicated. Her internal dialogue was relentless. She asked herself if she was overthinking, if she was projecting fears onto him that weren't really there. But deep down, she knew there were truths beneath the surface, fragments of his past that might not align with the man she wanted to see. The risk of regret hovered over her like a cloud, mingling with the excitement that still buzzed from the night. Every smile he flashed, every casual glance, seemed layered with meaning she couldn't fully decode yet. As they shared a quiet breakfast, Stig hummed a new melody, scribbled notes on paper, and occasionally glanced at Aviva with a smile that was warm but distracted. She tried to focus on the moment, to appreciate the charm, the way he could make her laugh even as her mind spiraled, but there was a tension underneath it, all she couldn't ignore. The romance was real, but the dissonance between what she wanted to believe and the tiny red flags she was beginning to notice made her cautious. She sensed a pattern in his behavior, small cracks that suggested there was more beneath the surface, more stories he hadn't yet shared. Even in the glow of this morning's intimacy, Aviva felt the unmistakable tug of suspicion, the subtle sensation that not everything about Stig was as it seemed, and that thrill she felt was tinged with the first hints of doubt she couldn't ignore. By mid-morning, Stig had vanished into his studio, a small space cluttered with instruments, cables, and sheets of lyrics scattered across the desk. He was already deep in his world, tapping melodies on a keyboard, strumming a guitar absent-mindedly, and occasionally mumbling phrases that sounded like lines from some half-formed love song. Aviva watched from the doorway, curiosity mixed with a creeping sense of unease. The tune he was working on was undeniably catchy, playful even, and it was clear that she had inspired it. The way he scribbled her name into the lyrics turned simple moments from the night before into musical hooks. It was flattering, charming, almost intoxicating. You could feel the pride he carried, the way he believed in his own charm, the conviction that he could turn affection into art. But as the song unfolded, Aviva began to notice a strange, slightly offbeat edge to it. Lines that were meant to be romantic carried an almost obsessive quality, playful but bordering on unsettling. She laughed nervously at one phrase, but another made her pause, tilting her head as she tried to decipher the intent behind it. The lyrics were personal, intimate, and yet they exposed something about him she hadn't anticipated, a certain self-centeredness, a willingness to make her the centerpiece of his creativity without considering how it might feel to be placed under such a spotlight so soon. Stig's confidence radiated from every movement, every chord struck with precision. And while it was impressive, it also felt relentless, demanding attention without pause for her perspective. Aviva's mind raced. On one hand, she felt the undeniable charm, the same charm that had drawn her in the night before, the spark that made her pulse quicken. But on the other hand, there was a tension, a whisper of doubt she couldn't ignore. He had fun with her inspiration. Yes, but had he stopped to consider what it meant for her? That mix of excitement and apprehension settled in her stomach like a weight she hadn't anticipated. His impulsiveness was on full display, pouring himself into the song, fueled by attraction and ego, seemingly blind to the consequences of his words, his actions, or the potential fallout if she didn't respond the way he hoped. The more she listened, the more she realized that this was a window into his behavior. Impulsive, self-assured, and entirely focused on immediate gratification. The song was bold, playful, undeniably romantic, but it also revealed a pattern. Stig's tendency to act first, charm later, and rarely stop to consider the long-term consequences. Aviva's mind flicked to the night before, to the impulsive decisions they had made together, to the unprotected intimacy that already carried potential consequences. There was a thread linking these moments, a warning that maybe his charm and confidence were masks for a deeper recklessness. She couldn't help but admire the skill and dedication he poured into the music, yet simultaneously, her intuition raised red flags. Stig's confidence was magnetic, almost hypnotic, but the way he wove her into the lyrics, turning a personal encounter into a public, performative moment, hinted at a self-centered streak she hadn't fully anticipated. It wasn't just the music, it was the behavior it represented. He was impulsive, focused on the thrill of the moment, and entirely confident in his ability to sweep consequences aside. And yet, she stayed, partly entranced, partly cautious. Her reactions were layered, the charm drew her in, the creepiness held her at a distance. She knew she was navigating a complex emotional landscape, one where attraction and concern existed side by side, and she could feel herself teetering between trust and hesitation. The song was a mirror, reflecting both his creativity and his recklessness, his confidence and his potential disregard for her feelings. Even as she smiled, clapping along to the beat, a voice inside her whispered that something about this intensity, this immediacy, didn't sit right, and that the playful melody might just be another hint that Stig's impulsive choices could come with consequences she wasn't ready to face. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the studio window, but Aviva barely noticed it. Her mind had drifted, tangled in thoughts she couldn't shake. Somewhere between the melody and the laughter, a new realization hit her like a punch. Stig had a serious ex in Texas, someone whose shadow lingered far longer than she had expected. She had known he had dated before, but the depth, the impact, the way it had shaped him, this was new. Her stomach tightened as she pieced together snippets of information. The breakup had been intense, leaving Stig hurt, distracted, even unable to focus on his music for a time. The idea that someone could still carry traces of another relationship was one thing, but to learn that it might be influencing his current behavior, that was something else entirely. Aviva replayed the stories she had heard, the accounts from friends, his management, even casual mentions in conversation. It wasn't just a casual fling, this was a chapter of his life that had left scars, a breakup serious enough to affect his career. That weight, that history, suddenly made her feel like she was stepping into a story that wasn't fully hers yet. She trusted him, or at least wanted to. But now there was a knot of doubt she couldn't ignore. Her instincts, which had guided her through intuition and attraction, were suddenly questioning her judgment. Was the chemistry she felt real? Or was it amplified by his unfinished past, by emotions he hadn't fully processed? The more she thought about it, the more uneasy she felt. She remembered moments from the first morning, the way he had seemed distracted, the way his focus sometimes shifted to work, or the studio, or even those half smiles that hinted at private thoughts he wasn't sharing. Now in retrospect, those small details felt like clues she hadn't wanted to see. Stig's charisma had drawn her in, yes, but this new knowledge introduced a tension she couldn't ignore. The contrast between attraction and warning signs was stark. On one hand, she was pulled toward him, captivated by the confidence, the charm, the playfulness, and the way he made her feel noticed. On the other hand, there was the ex, the Texas trip, the unresolved heartbreak, and the lingering uncertainty that made her pulse quicken. Not with excitement, but with anxiety. Aviva tried to weigh the balance, attraction versus caution, intuition versus desire. Every moment with Stig felt like a tug-of-war between thrill and doubt. She questioned herself constantly. Was she overthinking? Was she projecting fears onto him unfairly? Or were the warning signs there? Subtle but insistent, demanding attention. Her emotions were messy, raw, a collision of desire, curiosity, and a creeping fear that she might be stepping into a situation she wasn't fully prepared for. There was also the human element of his past, something she couldn't ignore. People don't just heal overnight, and unresolved feelings have a way of creeping into new connections. She had to consider how much of Stig was present in the moment with her, and how much of him was still tethered to the past. It was uncomfortable, unsettling, but it was real. Chemistry alone didn't erase the complications of history, and the more she considered it, the more she realized that she couldn't ignore her gut instincts any longer. Even as the romance glowed around them, Aviva felt the subtle tension in her chest, the whisper of doubt that refused to be silenced, and she knew that confronting this, understanding what was truly happening with Stig and his Texas past, would be unavoidable. The question wasn't if it would come up, but when, and that anticipation alone made the next steps impossible to ignore. The next morning, the air between Aviva and Stig felt heavier than usual. Sunlight poured through the window, illuminating a room that seemed too small for the tension settling in their silence. Aviva had hoped that sleep would clear her mind, that the warmth of the morning could reset her thought, but instead, every word, every glance carried weight. She tried to start with casual conversation, questions about his day, the studio, even the lyrics he had scribbled yesterday, but every answer felt half-measured, almost rehearsed. There was charm in his responses, yes, but it didn't erase the nagging feeling that some truths were being carefully guarded. Aviva found herself dissecting every phrase, every pause. Her mind raced with what-ifs and could-be's, weighing the chemistry against the unease gnawing at her. Her intuition, usually a trusted guide, was screaming in the background. Yet she hesitated, unsure how to voice her concerns without starting an argument she didn't feel ready for. She knew Stig was impulsive, confident, and magnetic, but she also realized that his impulsivity could be a double-edged sword, thrilling in the moment, potentially dangerous in decisions that carried real consequences. As she probed lightly about his past relationships and the Texas ex, Stig brushed off the questions with a grin, a casual shrug, a charm that masked evasiveness. He laughed at some things, deflected others, and emphasized the present as if that alone could erase history. He spoke about his music, about the inspiration she had provided, about dreams and future gigs, but the subtext was clear. He wasn't ready to dig too deeply, and he certainly wasn't prepared to confront the past. For Aviva, that deflection was maddening. She wanted openness, reassurance, clarity, but instead, she was faced with evasions wrapped in confidence and a smile that both charmed and frustrated her simultaneously. Psychologically, it was fascinating and also exhausting. Impulsivity, trust issues, and fear of vulnerability were colliding, creating a pressure cooker in that small morning space. Stig's impulsive nature had led to the reckless night, but his charm kept her invested. His ability to evade uncomfortable truths created tension, but his playful attention kept her emotionally hooked. Aviva felt pulled in opposite directions, the thrill of attraction versus the nagging awareness that some lines had already been crossed without discussion, that boundaries had been blurred in ways she wasn't entirely ready to process. Aviva attempted to probe further, carefully framing questions, trying to test his reactions without creating a confrontation. "Do you ever think about Texas?" she asked softly, watching for a flicker, a hesitation, anything. Stig smiled, a confident, easy smile that suggested nothing serious, and said something about being focused on now, on her, on their time together. It was soothing on the surface, yet underneath, it left her unsatisfied. She wanted depth, truth, reassurance, but all she got was charm and deflection. Each interaction reinforced a pattern. Stig managed conflict with charisma rather than transparency, leaving Aviva suspended between curiosity, doubt, and desire. The tension built as minutes stretched into conversation loops. Aviva wanted to speak, to confront, to understand fully, yet she feared escalation. There was a delicate balance between asserting herself and keeping the fragile connection intact. Her instincts screamed at her to address the unresolved issues before they snowballed, but her heart hesitated, aware of the pull of attraction, the allure of Stig's charm, and the fear of breaking the fragile morning bond. Every exchange glance carried layers of meaning, curiosity, frustration, desire, and anxiety, all colliding in ways that made it impossible to relax, impossible to feel fully secure. As their conversation ended with smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes, the lingering question hovered like smoke in the room. Will Aviva confront Stig about the Texas ex and the hidden layers of his past? Or will she keep her doubts buried, letting the tension simmer until it erupts? The answer, for now, remains uncertain, keeping every moment charged and every second of their time together a minefield of emotion. The drive to the performance location should have felt exciting, electric, the kind of build-up that makes you feel like you're stepping into something glamorous and unforgettable, but instead, There was a strange undercurrent in the car, a subtle shift in energy that Aviva couldn't quite ignore, no matter how hard she tried to focus on the music playing softly through the speakers. Stig was animated at first, tapping the steering wheel, talking about the crowd, the vibe, the set list, but there were tiny fractures in the rhythm of his enthusiasm. Micro pauses when his phone buzzed, quick glances at the screen he tried to angle away from her view, shifts in tone that were almost imperceptible unless you were paying very close attention. And Aviva was paying attention. It wasn't anything dramatic, not yet, but it was enough. The way he smiled a little too quickly when she asked who kept texting, the way he changed the subject from personal questions back to logistics, the way his hand, which had been resting casually on her knee earlier, slowly withdrew as they got closer to the venue, as if he were mentally preparing to switch roles, from intimate partner to public persona. She watched the transformation happen in real time. His posture straightened, his voice deepened slightly, his focus sharpened, but not on her, on the show, on the crowd, on something else. Inside the venue, the lights were low, the energy buzzing, and Stig seemed completely in his element. He greeted people with effortless charm, hugged a few too warmly, laughed a little too loudly, and introduced Aviva, but not with the gravity she expected. She wasn't dismissed exactly, but she wasn't anchored either. It was subtle, the way he said her name, almost as if she were a guest passing through rather than someone significant. That subtlety cut deeper than anything obvious would have. Aviva stood back and observed. She watched his body language when female fans approached. She noticed how he leaned in close to hear them, how his hand lingered at the small of someone's back for half a second too long, how his compliments flowed easily and automatically. It was polished, practiced. This wasn't spontaneous charm. This was routine, and the realization settled uncomfortably in her chest. Was this just stage presence, or was this a pattern? There's a difference between intention and behavior, and sometimes people hide behind good intentions while their behavior tells the real story. Stig might genuinely believe he meant well, might genuinely think he was just being friendly, professional, charismatic, but patterns don't lie. Evasion in the car, guarded phone screen, tone shifts, emotional distance once the spotlight turned on. These weren't isolated moments. They were threads beginning to weave together into something harder to ignore. Aviva tried to rationalize it. He's a performer. This is his world. Confidence is part of the brand. But her intuition kept whispering that this wasn't just branding. It felt like duality, like she was seeing two versions of the same man, one intimate and magnetic in private, the other expansive and unattached in public. And the space between those two versions was where her anxiety lived. During the performance, he dedicated a song to inspiration, flashing her a grin from the stage, and the crowd cheered. But even that moment felt layered. Was it romantic? Yes. Was it strategic? Maybe. She couldn't tell anymore. And that uncertainty was the most unsettling part. Because when you can't clearly define someone's priorities, you start questioning your own place in their world. Backstage afterward, his phone buzzed again, and this time he stepped away to answer it, turning slightly so she couldn't hear. It was quick, just a minute, but long enough for doubt to grow teeth. When he returned, he acted normal. Maybe too normal, brushing off her curious look with a light joke and a kiss to her forehead that felt more like distraction than reassurance. And as Aviva stood there, surrounded by noise and applause and flashing lights, she felt something crystallize inside her. Not proof, not yet, but the growing awareness that she might not be seeing the full picture of who Stig really prioritizes when the cameras aren't rolling and the crowd isn't cheering. Because sometimes the biggest reveal isn't in what someone says, but in the quiet patterns they think you won't notice. And the closer she looked, the clearer it became that something significant was building just beneath the surface, waiting to come out in a way neither of them would be able to. Ignored out the tension had been building quietly, like pressure behind glass, and when it finally cracked, it wasn't explosive at first, it was controlled, steady, almost too calm. Aviva waited until they were alone, away from the noise, away from the crowd, away from distractions, and she looked at him in a way that made it clear this wasn't going to be brushed off with a smile or a joke. Her voice didn't shake, but it carried weight when she asked him directly about Texas, about the trip, about the ex he kept minimizing as if she were just a footnote instead of a chapter. She didn't accuse, she asked. But sometimes a direct question feels heavier than an accusation. For a split second, something shifted in Stig's expression. It was quick, almost invisible, but it was there. His jaw tightened before he relaxed it. His eyes flickered away before returning to hers. Then came the defense. Smooth, but slightly rushed. He insisted nothing happened. He said the trip was about closure, about tying up loose ends, about being mature. He emphasized timing, said it was before things became serious with Aviva, said she was overthinking it. The words sounded reasonable. On paper they made sense, but delivery matters, and his delivery carried just enough tension to keep doubt alive. Aviva listened carefully. Not just to what he was saying, but to how he was saying it. The way he crossed his arms halfway through. The way his tone sharpened when she pressed slightly for details. The way he flipped the narrative subtly, suggesting that trust meant not digging too deep into the past. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't fully transparent either. It felt like someone protecting a version of events rather than calmly explaining them. And this is where it became complicated. Because chemistry doesn't just disappear when suspicion shows up. She still felt drawn to him. She still remembered the laughter, the music, the intensity of their connection. That pull was real. But so was the caution rising in her chest. The rational side of her brain began lining up facts, comparing timelines, analyzing inconsistencies. Meanwhile, her emotional side whispered that maybe she was sabotaging something good by pushing too hard. That internal battle was louder than the argument itself. Stig stepped closer, softening his tone, saying she meant something to him, that he wouldn't jeopardize this over something in the past. He framed it as insecurity, as misunderstanding, as fear. And maybe some of that was true. But reassurance without clarity can feel hollow. Aviva didn't want poetry. She wanted precision. She didn't want charm. She wanted consistency. There was a moment of silence between them that felt heavier than any raised voice. The air seemed thick with everything unsaid. She searched his face for something definitive. Guilt, honesty, regret, certainty. But what she saw instead was complexity. He wasn't blatantly guilty. He wasn't undeniably innocent either. He was layered, and layered people are the hardest to read. This is the point where anyone watching has to start analyzing behavior over words, because words are crafted. Words are strategic, but micro-reactions, defensiveness, redirecting blame, subtle agitation when pressed for specifics, those are harder to fake. Was he simply frustrated at being questioned? Or was he unsettled? Because there was more to the story than he wanted revealed. Aviva felt the weight of misjudgment pressing on her too. What if she was wrong? What if this was her projecting fear onto someone who genuinely cared? The risk of confronting someone isn't just losing them, it's realizing you might have misunderstood them. But the risk of staying silent is worse, because silence breeds resentment, and resentment corrodes connection slowly from the inside out. He repeated that nothing happened. He held her face gently, looked into her eyes, and asked her to trust him. And in that moment, the choice wasn't just about believing him, it was about believing her own instincts. Chemistry pulled her forward. Caution held her back. And just when it seemed like everything had been laid on the table, there was still a lingering question hovering beneath the surface. Something slightly off in the timing. Something not fully accounted for in his explanations. Something Aviva hadn't yet uncovered that could change the entire narrative if it ever came to light. Because sometimes the biggest truth isn't in the confrontation itself, but in the detail you don't even realize you're missing. The confrontation ended, but the silence afterward felt louder than anything they said. Aviva smiled in front of him, nodded at the reassurance, let the moment soften on the surface, yet the second she was alone, the thoughts rushed in all at once. Relief mixed with doubt, attraction tangled with anxiety. She replayed his words in her head, not once but 10 times, testing them for crack. He said nothing happened. He said it was closure. He said she was overthinking. And still, something inside her refused to fully relax. That's the uncomfortable part about intuition. It rarely screams. It whispers. And when you ignore it, the whisper doesn't disappear. It lingers in the background of every affectionate moment. Aviva wanted to enjoy the chemistry. She wanted to lean into the excitement of something new, something intense, something that felt alive. But excitement without stability starts to feel like standing on a moving surface. You're smiling, but your balance isn't steady. Regret crept in too. Not only about the confrontation, but about the first night. Unprotected intimacy carries weight. Emotional and physical risk intertwined. When passion moves faster than trust, consequences start to feel heavier the morning after. She began questioning her own pacing. Why did she move so quickly? Was it connection or was it adrenaline? Did she ignore red flags because she wanted the fantasy to stay intact? This is where human behavior gets uncomfortable. People ignore early warning signs when the reward feels bigger than the risk. Cognitive dissonance kicks in. Your brain sees inconsistency, but your heart argues for potential. You minimize details. You reframe doubt. You tell yourself you are being dramatic. The brain protects the version of reality that feels better in the moment. Aviva wasn't naive. She was hopeful. And hope can blur edges. She scrolled through old memories in her mind, comparing timelines he mentioned to what she had observed. Small details began to stand out. The way he avoided specific. The way he flipped concern into insecurity. None of these were proof of wrongdoing. But patterns matter more than promises, and patterns were forming slowly. At the same time, she questioned herself. Was she projecting fear from past relationships onto him? Was she reacting to his reputation as a player more than his actual behavior? Sometimes people carry labels longer than they deserve. She tried to be fair. She tried to give him space to be different from his past. But trust is not built on potential. It is built on consistency, and consistency takes time, not intensity. If you were in her position, would you spot the signs early? Would you pause after the first red flag? Or would chemistry convince you to wait for clear evidence? Most people do not leave at the first doubt. They wait for confirmation. They wait for something undeniable. By then, emotions are already invested. That is why early red flags are often rationalized instead of respected. Aviva felt the pull to protect her heart without sabotaging something that might grow into something real. That tension is exhausting. You want to believe, but you do not want to look foolish later. She told herself to observe, not accuse. To gather clarity, not jump to conclusion. But observation requires emotional distance. And emotional distance is hard when attraction is strong. What made this more unsettling was Stig's impulsive energy. He moved fast in romance, fast in music, fast in emotion. Impulsive people create intense highs. They also create unpredictable lows. If he made another sudden decision without thinking through consequences, the fallout would not just affect him. It would affect her too. And as Aviva tried to quiet her thoughts and lean into the present moment, one unsettling possibility began forming in the back of her mind. If he handled past relationships with this level of blur and ambiguity, what would stop him from repeating the same pattern with her when the next exciting distraction appeared? Because impulsive choices do not vanish on their own. They resurface, and when they do, regret tends to follow close behind. Pressure rarely comes from one direction. It builds from the sides. A comment here, a look there, and sometimes all it takes is one outsider to shift the entire emotional balance. During a casual hangout after rehearsal, someone from Stig's circle, a friend who had known him for years, made an offhand remark that didn't sound dramatic on the surface, but landed heavily for Aviva. The friend joked about how Stig always falls hard and fast, how every new muse becomes the center of his universe for a season. The tone was light. The implication was not. Aviva laughed politely. Inside, her stomach tightened. A season, not a lifetime, not stability. A season. The friend continued, mentioning how Texas had been intense, how that breakup had messed him up more than he admit. Again, casual delivery, but layered meaning. If that relationship still carried emotional weight, was Aviva stepping into something unfinished? Or was she the rebound disguised as inspiration? Stig brushed it off quickly, redirecting the conversation, placing his arm around Aviva as if physical closeness could cancel out doubt. He said his past made him wiser. He said he had grown. Growth is possible. People change. But growth also shows through patterns, not speeches. This is where tension layered itself quietly. On one side, Stig's current behavior toward Aviva felt affectionate and focused. On the other side, the history painted by those around him suggested a cycle: fast attachment, big emotion, creative inspiration, then emotional burnout. Was she witnessing the beginning of a genuine shift or the early chapter of a familiar script? Aviva began to observe more closely. When his manager approached to discuss upcoming travel, she noticed how quickly Stig's priorities shifted from emotional reassurance to career momentum. His energy sharpened. His excitement grew. Ambition lit up his face in a way romance did not quite match. That contrast stayed with her. She wasn't competing with an ex. She might be competing with his lifestyle. And here's the uncomfortable truth about impulsive emotional decisions. Intensity feels convincing, urgency feels romantic, but long-term stability thrives on patience and accountability. When someone moves fast in every area of life, love often becomes another thrill rather than a commitment. Aviva wasn't afraid of passion. She was afraid of becoming temporary. Trust is tested most when outside voices confirm your private doubts. She had sensed something unresolved. Now she had context. Not proof, not betrayal, context. And context shifts perception. Stig, sensing distance, doubled down on charm. More affection, more reassurance, more talk about future plans. Yet none of it directly addressed the pattern described by his own circle. If someone truly wants to build trust, they confront patterns openly. Avoidance, even subtle avoidance, keeps suspicion alive. Aviva faced a quiet internal calculation. Emotional risk versus potential reward. If she leaned in fully and he repeated history, the crash would hurt. If she pulled back prematurely and he was sincere, she would sabotage something meaningful. That tension is not dramatic on the outside. It is exhausting on the inside. Every relationship has a turning point where illusion meets reality. She could feel that point approaching. Not explosive, not chaotic, but decisive. Because one more inconsistency, one more impulsive move, one more hint of divided loyalty might push her from hopeful to guarded permanently. And once someone becomes guarded, intimacy changes shape forever. The question hanging in the air wasn't whether Stig liked her. He clearly did. The real question was whether liking someone was enough to override ingrained pattern. Because if his next decision proved that thrill still outweighed commitment, the emotional fallout would not be subtle. It would force a choice neither of them was ready to make. The noise settled. No dramatic breakup, no clear confession, no cinematic ending, just two people standing at the edge of something undefined. And sometimes that is more unsettling than chaos. Aviva did not get a smoking gun. She did not get a perfect reassurance either. What she got was ambiguity. And ambiguity forces reflection. She began to step back emotionally, not in a cold way, but in a measured way. Attraction was still there. Chemistry had not disappeared, but intensity no longer blinded her the way it did that first night. She started observing without rushing, listening without immediately believing, not because she wanted to punish him, but because she wanted clarity for herself. Stig's intentions remained layered. He showed affection. He included her in plans. He spoke about future possibilities. Yet his behavior still carried flashes of impulsivity, quick decisions, fast emotional highs, strong reactions when questioned. None of those traits make someone evil, but they do create risk when combined with romance. Trust is not built on promises delivered in emotionally charged moments. Trust grows from consistency under pressure. When questioned, do you stay calm and transparent? When faced with temptation, do you act aligned with your words? When past relationships surface, do you minimize them or address them fully? These are not dramatic tests. They are quiet ones. Aviva realized something uncomfortable about herself too. She was drawn to intensity, the thrill of being someone's inspiration, the rush of fast connection. That kind of energy feels intoxicating, but intoxication fades. Stability does not. Attraction often pulls toward excitement, while long-term peace demands patience. Those two forces do not always align. Here is the psychological trap many fall into. We assume strong chemistry equals strong compatibility. We interpret passion as depth. We confuse urgency with importance. Then, when red flags appear, we rationalize them because the emotional reward feels high. Cognitive dissonance works overtime to protect the fantasy. Aviva saw herself slipping into that pattern and chose to slow down instead of speeding up. That decision alone shifted the power dynamic. Stig now had to prove consistency over time, not win her over with moment. That is where impulsive personalities struggle. Sustained accountability is less glamorous than grand gestures. It requires discipline. It requires humility. It requires being comfortable without constant adrenaline. The unresolved question lingers. Was he evolving or was he repeating? Change is possible. Patterns can break, but change reveals itself in behavior sustained across weeks and months, not in one emotional conversation. Aviva did not walk away. She did not surrender blindly either. She chose awareness. And awareness is quiet strength. If you have ever felt torn between chemistry and caution, you know this tension. You know the way your heart argues with your logic. You know how easy it is to silence doubt when someone makes you feel chosen. But being chosen in the moment is not the same as being valued long-term. That difference changes everything. Stig's next move will matter more than his last explanation because intentions sound good. Patterns tell the truth. And this story does not end here. Relationships built on intensity often reach a second second turning point when real-life stress tests the connection. Travel, career pressure, distance, jealousy. Those moments expose what attraction hides. The bigger question is not whether Aviva can trust Stig. It is whether Stig can master his own impulses long enough to build something stable. Because in the next story I am bringing to TLC Drama Live, we are looking at another couple facing the same collision between passion and pattern, where one impulsive decision changes everything and forces a choice that cannot be undone.